Hey folks, you got Harrington here. I'm still in Spain, but hold on. I've actually lost a few subscribers since I started talking about Spain, so don't dip out. I'm going to get back to my regular program. Today we're going to talk about what's often called comparative international law. Now we're just going to focus on a few of the aspects of the legal systems that I think you guys care about, you, my real estate investors and my business owner clients. And we're going to compare the U.S. system with, well, the countries that I know you guys care about. And with that said, let's go. Our Practice Makes Perfect is the podcast for business owners and real estate investors, siempre con un cariño especial para los clientes extranjeros. Part 1. I call myself an international attorney. Now, what, if anything, does that actually mean? That's a fair question. In law school, we're presented with these courses called public international law, and those are treaties between countries, exporting, importing, and dealings between different countries. And that's cool stuff, but I don't know how to get those jobs. I don't know who gets those jobs, so that's not really what I do. Also, immigration attorneys do call themselves international attorneys, and I think that's more or less true. I do just a little bit of immigration. I only do the visas that you guys care about. In other words, investor visas or, business-related visas, like L1s, E2s, those are the ones that we call. So I don't run around calling myself an immigration attorney. So then you might ask, what is it that prompts me to run around calling myself an international attorney, and specifically an international business or real estate attorney? Well, here it goes. I'm not going to bore you guys with the different places I've studied and the languages and all that. I think I've bored you enough with that. It just comes down to this. I call myself an international attorney because I have some awareness of other legal systems, and really because I focus on international clients. Now, that's not to say that I don't have a great deal of affection for you, my domestic clients. And in fact, let me hasten to add that at the end of the day, it's really all the same stuff. I'm not a Spanish attorney. I'm not licensed through any other country. So I'm just practicing U.S. law, and in particular, Florida law. So whether you're a domestic client or an international client, I'm really doing the same stuff. I guess I just like to think that the time that I've spent abroad, the time I've spent studying other legal systems, the language skills, makes me particularly well suited for international clients. But enough on that. Part 2, let's talk about the figure of a notary, because that's a very important figure in most of the world. Now, in the United States, and I mean no disrespect, I've been a notary, but as you probably know, it's basically just a matter of going online, filling out some forms, and ordering yourself a stamp, right? And as in a U.S. notary, public notary, you're not expected to be any kind of an expert at all. You're not expected to understand the documents that you're putting your stamp on. Nothing like that. All you're expected to do is confirm the identity of the person who is signing in front of you. By stark contrast, the figure of a notary in most of the world, at least all the civil law countries that I'm aware of, is not only a lawyer, it's really a super lawyer. I would go so far as to say that a notary in civil law countries is closer to a judge than to a lawyer. And there's a great deal of confidence put in this notary. And they have a great deal of authority. So when it comes to important transactions like weddings or family stuff, divorces, or more on brand for this podcast, real estate transactions, the notary is the central figure. People from most civil law countries are used to going to the notary to finalize their real estate transactions. So then when they come to the United States, and we don't have this figure of this, beyond reproach super lawyer who can be in charge of the transaction and make sure that everything is done fairly and correctly, then they get a little bit nervous sometimes. So that's when I get into an explanation of title company. We don't have a notary, so we replace that figure with the title company. Now, the title company, like a notary, is basically in charge of the transaction, will oversee the transaction, and will hopefully cause everything to be done correctly. But there are some stark differences. So, for example, a title company doesn't have any loyalty to either party, whereas a notary, I think, takes it upon him or herself to make sure that everybody understands the deal and that the deal is relatively fair, or at least everybody understands what they're getting themselves into. Title companies don't really have that responsibility. They may spend time explaining, to the parties what the deal is and what the documents are that they're looking at, but not always. The notary or the title company may say, talk to your realtor or talk to your attorney. Now, this is my personal opinion here because I've been before a notary. Yeah, I have a title company. I will say that I don't believe title companies are vested with the same kind of prestige or confidence that notaries get in civil law. But, and that being the case, we have insurance. We make up for that. This super lawyer figure who is above reproach and we know is not going to do anything weird because they've gone through way too much trouble to become a notary, to put their license at risk. Since we don't have that figure, title companies are always backed up by insurance. So I guess that's an important thing that I often find myself explaining to my foreign clients is that we don't have a notary. We instead have title companies, and you may very well want to also include representation, legal representation. Whereas, in a civil law country, the notary is himself or herself a lawyer. So very often the parties will just come and they'll just rely on the notary for everything. There's not the same. There's not the same dynamic here in the U.S. You're going to want to potentially not just rely on the title company to handle the transaction, do everything correctly, and look out for everybody's best interests. I wouldn't count on that. You may very well want to get a lawyer to represent you in that transaction. That's the difference. Part 3, let's talk about setting up a company. That actually is something that we do. We do set up companies here in Spain. Again, not myself personally, but I do my Spanish attorneys. We do that kind of work. And what a nightmare. I mean, I'm not saying I'm anxious to take on that kind of work, but if you are, a party outside of Spain and you need to establish a company here in Spain, let me know. We can do it for you. I will tell you this. If you're coming from the United States, you're used to that process being relatively straightforward. I mean, in Florida, as we have discussed often, it's a super simple process. You do it online for the most part, depending upon what kind of company you're setting up, but it's probably just going to be online. Takes, half an hour to get the thing registered. Of course, you still got to draft up the governing documents, but, the process of getting registered with the state in and of itself is really quite painless and cheap. On the other end of the spectrum, however, you got Spain, where it seems like the country is doing its best to discourage people from setting up companies. There are several steps involved, including a notary. You are going to need a notary for this. I'm glad we just talked about it in the last segment. Also, you're going to have to have a bank account, and you're going to have to fund the bank account with a decent amount of cash, probably. I'm talking like 20 grand or so. And there is a very specific sequence of events that have to take place in a particular quarter if you hope to get this done in your lifetime. And now I don't mean to be obnoxious, Spaniards. I'm just going to say that I think the U.S. got it right on this one. We're not perfect by any means, but, why make it so complicated for somebody to start up a new venture? U.S. makes it easy, and I think on the whole, that's a good thing for the economy. So, while in the U.S., you may want to hire a lawyer to help you set up your company just because there are a few aspects of it involved, right? The governing documents, the BOI disclosure reporting, the EIN, getting your tax identification number. There's a whole package of things that's very convenient, so you may want to get a lawyer to do that, but the registration process itself, will be honest with you guys, that's really pretty straightforward. By contrast, if you're trying to set up a company in Europe, or at least in Spain, that's the one I know the most about, you're 100% going to need a lawyer to help you through that process. Alright, in conclusion, I guess that's about as far as I'm going to go because I think that's the stuff you guys really care about. Normally, when we're talking about Europe or South America versus the United States, we're talking about common law versus civil law. And there are indeed some differences there, which in my opinion, are getting less and less pronounced with time. I think the civil law countries are becoming more like the U.S. system. It's my opinion. But anyway, it's a very technical conversation. You guys probably don't care about that. So that is our comparative law episode tailored for business owners and real estate investors. And I will see you guys next time. Don't forget to do the honorable thing down there. Later.